Hello everyone, welcome to episode 42 of Show Fever. Today we'll be going over episode 5 of One Piece Live Action Season 2, known as Wax On, Wax Off. Now you'll have to apologize, a little bit more disheveled look than usual today because I think my first weekend off in like 3 months, so I decided to take in my well-needed respite. But so let's get into the story of Wax On, Wax Off, which I really enjoyed. So we start off, we see Nami, Vivi, and Zoro in the wax house they were put in the previous, episode, and they are, Vivi is trying to find a way to get Zoro and Nami out of their trance, and so what Vivi ends up doing is she notices that Nami's paint's on her leg, so she uses her boot to rub it off, and Nami ends up coming to her senses. They kind of discuss who Miss Golden Week is and how her power works, which is she uses select paints to make people feel select emotions. For example, yellow makes them feel like kind of lackadaisical, green makes them keep laughing and chuckling and all that, blue makes them really sad, and black makes them betray their dreams and all that. So we end up seeing that, and then we move on to the outside of the house where Mr. 3 and Miss Golden Week are discussing, and Mr. 3 kind of asking if Miss Golden Week ended up finding the captain of the crew, which is Luffy, and she's like, yeah, I have him as my plaything out on the beach taking a picnic. So after this, we see as it shifts to where Luffy is, and we see as Usopp runs up on him, and we see Luffy is kind of in the dumps. He's down on himself because he has the blue paint on him, and he's thinking that he caused all of this, and he has failed his family and all that. Well, not family, but crew. And Usopp's trying to get him out of it, but eventually they hear Miss Golden Week coming, so Usopp goes skedaddling off. And then we see as Sanji's kind of looking around, looking for, just anyone, because he can't find anyone. Eventually, he ends up finding the wax house. So then we see as Usopp briefly runs into Brogy again. He realizes Brogy's alive because Brogy didn't get fully penetrated through with Dory's sword. So he just kind of talks with him briefly, and nothing really actually comes of that. But yeah, so then we see as Miss Golden Week is messing around with Luffy because he's her new plaything, and we see as she's putting different paints on him, causing him to feel a vast array of emotions. And oh my goodness, okay, they did a really good casting on Miss Golden Week because Miss Golden Week is looks like a child, but she's 18, which is weird because then we get characters like Rebecca who's 16, and obviously Oda has some odd selections when it comes to design. But yeah, Miss Golden Week, I feel like they cast her really well because they got a really young-looking adult, I believe. And it might be a kid, but I think it's an adult. I don't know. I haven't looked at the cast. But yeah, they did really good on her casting because it fits her character design very well. And I forgot how much I hate this character so much because she is so annoying. She's talking about how, yeah, I painted my parents up and put them in a box, and they screamed and all that for a couple of days. So yeah, she's just, I don't like her. But yeah, we see that. We see as eventually she puts the black paint on Luffy, which causes him to betray his wishes because she kind of goes tired of messing around with him. And we see him kind of struggling through the hypnotic state, and we see him kind of talking with his own mind besides with the paint. But then eventually when she puts the black paint on, then when he starts to betray his friends. Now, briefly, we swap back to Sanji's perspective, where Sanji is walking up on Mr. 3's house, and he goes inside, and he's kind of looking about, looking for files and stuff like that. He ends up finding an eternal log pose to Alabasta, and a transponder snail ends up ringing. And naturally, he searches for the snail. He picks it up, and he answers, and it's it's Mr. Zero on the line. We eventually learns Crocodile, so I'm just gonna call him Crocodile. But Crocodile's on the line. He's kind of talking with him, and due to a voice scrambler, they believe that Mr. Zero or Crocodile believes that it is Mr. 3 on the phone because of the voice scramblers that they're kind of discussing. And he's asking him just about how the mission's going and all that. Sanji tells him that Straw Hats are dead, but eventually he mentions how he's gonna send the unlucky. Mr. Zero mentions how he's sending the unluckies in, and while they're on the call, so he's like, I gotta put you in a hole as the unluckies flying. Now, I wasn't expecting the unluckies to look as good as they did, but Mr. 13 looked phenomenal. I mean, so did the Vulture. I can't remember what the Vulture's name is. Miss Friday, maybe? I think it might be Miss Friday. But yeah. So they just looked really good character design wise. I was not expecting them to look as good as they'd be. Like I said, Mr. 13 looked cool, and then we get a little fight sequence in between Sanji and Mr. 13, and that was a goofy fight sequence, but it was really fun to watch. Yeah, so then after Sanji's done dispatching the unluckies, he ends up getting back on the call with Crocodile, and Crocodile's like, you're not Mr. 3, are you? And he warns him about how he's going to kind of send his wrath toward him. But then after that, we see as Luffy is on the verge of walking into the sea because he has the black paint, and Miss Golden Week ended up telling him to do so, and she's kind of wanted to kill himself because she's tired of messing with him. But then Usopp comes running in, and he steps on the the table that had Miss Goldenweek's like paint stuff on it, flings it, and her little like, I don't remember what the tray that artists have because I'm not an artist, but that little thing ends up flying up Miss Goldenweek, getting on her face, so she has all the paints on her face now. She's going through some bipolar eye episodes, but yeah, so then we see as Usopp runs and saves Luffy from the ocean because the fruit users can't swim, and due to the water, Luffy ends up getting the paint washed off his face, and they're like, okay, we need to go find our people. So they end up going, and they run up on the trio of Mr. 3, Mr. 5, and Miss Valentine, because they're all kind of there together since they agreed to their contract in the prior episode. And so we see as now, with the cake, we see that Zoro, Vivi, and Nami have been placed on the cake, and the candles have been started to spin. And these candles, what they do is they slowly allow wax to descend upon the people on them, so they slowly become wax figures. Now, we see as Zoro attempts to escape while he's doing by cutting his legs, but this ultimately ends up not being fruitful because he ultimately is more waxed by Mr. 3, so he can't actually cut at his legs. And it's kind of fruitless anyways because the wax is as powerful as steel, and Zoro can't cut through steel yet. We see that later on, probably in Season 3. So I can't wait to see that because that was some decent foreshadowing. But, yeah, so after that, we ultimately end up seeing as more and more wax descends upon him. We get to see Zoro hit his pose, his hand on his hip, sword in the sky pose. I was so glad we got to see that because I didn't know if we were in the live action. But, yeah, I was super glad to see Zoro able to hit his pose. I loved that. But, yeah, so eventually we see as all of them are covered in wax, and then, like I said, Luffy and Usopp end up pulling up, and Mr. 3 reveals to them that they only have a couple minutes left since there's only so much air in their lungs, so he's like, you gotta beat me or get them fast, because they're gonna die. So Luffy ends up deciding to fight Mr. 3, and Mr. 3 goes running off into the woods, and Luffy is chasing him down, and Usopp is left to fight Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, which is a crazy matchup, because Usopp, he ain't built for that stuff, but we learned that he's pretty built for some of it. So, we see then as Usopp's calling, he's like, I want this to be like a duel of like honorable Elbaf status. So he's like, I want a 1v1 Miss Valentine. So they end up agreeing to a 1v1, and we see as Miss Valentine and Usopp kind of duke it out for a little bit. And we see as Usopp's kind of on the ropes for a little bit because he's getting beat, and he starts to run around the cake, and Miss Valentine's just kind of chasing him. And we see as Mr. 5's just kind of yapping while all this is going on. But yeah, then we go to Luffy and Mr. 3. And Luffy's chasing Mr. 3, and he ends up running on a wax figurine. And Mr. 3 uses a bunch of wax figurines to kind of fool Luffy. And eventually he throws a knife at him, and this gets Luffy in the arm, but it doesn't actually do much damage. So then we go back to Usopp, and Usopp has been still having Miss Valentine chase him around the cake. But then eventually Miss Valentine gets up to him, so he just starts rage baiting Miss Valentine. She starts like punching his head in, and this causes the wax to crack. And so the wax slowly begins to crack, and then the people, so Vivi, Nami, and Zoro, are ultimately freed. Well, Vivi and Nami are freed. Zoro's still kind of stuck at the feet. But yeah, so then after this, we see as they begin to get freed, Nami and Vivi attempt to deal a little bit with Miss Valentine, and then we see as Mr. 5 is trying to deal with Zoro. He's trying to get him killed so he doesn't get off the cake. And we see as he uses his booger bomb gun, and that's honestly quite a creative weapon, but I don't see how so these usually, I don't know if they explode on impact or if they just explode on, like, stimuli, because if they exploded on impact, they would blow up within the gun, but, because they don't have a primer, technically, to them, but that doesn't really matter. But, yeah, we see this, and, Zoro is able to block him with his sword and all that, and then eventually, Usopp shoots a fire star at, Zoro, which allows him to, oh, no, he doesn't do that first. Okay, first he ends up shooting a Tabasco shot at Mr. 5. And Mr. 5, we get to see the Tabasco shot with the fire blazing mouth and all that. So that was really cool. And we see then as Usopp shoots a fire star at Zoro, which allows his blades to get ignited and the rest of the wax on his feet to get melted off. So he hops up and hits Mr. 5 with, I believe it's an onigiri. He doesn't call out his attack, but I believe it's an onigiri because the 3 sword like this right here. So he ends up slashing him, and that's the end for Mr. 5 for the time being. And eventually, Mrs. Valentine is ultimately incapacitated for the time being by the others. So we end up going along, And we see as Luffy and Mr. 3 are now in the cave where Dory was, and Luffy sees that Dory has been turned to wax, and that kind of enrages him a little bit, and Mr. 3 ends up, freezing one of Luffy's hands in wax. He uses a Gum pistol at him, so he gets it with the wax, and this weighs Luffy's hand down. But Luffy gets the right idea to start spinning around using centripetal motion, or centripetal force inertia, I believe it's force, to build up more progressive speed and power with his arm that he has having difficulty to move. And so he starts spinning, and he eventually uses his motion to knock Mr. 3, and then Mr. 3 is incapacitated. And so then we see as the effects of the wax start to wear off, because when Devil Fruit users are incapacitated, or if they're killed, their Devil Fruit powers wear off. So we see this, and Mr. 3, like I said, is beat, and Luffy, Nami, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp all end up regrouping, and they recognize Usopp as the victor of Little Garden. So we move along, and then eventually we see as everyone's kind of saying goodbye to Dorian Brogy. Brogy's kind of sending him off. He's like, okay, when you leave this island, you need to go straight. And Sanji shows that he got the eternal pose to Alabasta, which makes everyone excited because they all want to go ahead and help Vivi at Alabasta. So we see as the crew gets ready to set off, and they're sailing away, and then a big odd goldfish ends up popping up. Captain Usopp's story reference? But, yeah. We see as this goldfish pops up, and they're like, oh, wait, how are we going to get past this? And they're like, no, don't turn, just keep going straight. So they keep going straight, and Dory and Brogy end up hitting it with this big old blast that cuts the fish in half, and they just keep going along. So then after that, we see as everyone's on the ship, and they're just kind of having a big little, not a big little, like an oxymoron right there, a big party on the ship. They're all eating, having fun. There's this one discussion, before this, Dory and Brogy end up realizing again what they were fighting for, and they don't get into a tussle, but they act like they're about to get into a tussle. And we see as Zoro and Sanji are briefly talking about the dinosaur, and Sanji's talking about how you could have turned that fish that they cut in half into sushi, and Zoro's like, man, that thing is too big for you to handle, and Sanji says, don't worry about me when it comes to size. So that was a stupid little joke there, but it was funny. And so they move along, and they're eventually eating a meal, and they're kind of discussing and all that, just kind of yapping about what happened. And Usopp eventually gets to telling his tale with obvious embellishments, as Usopp does. And so then we see as Nami and Vivi are briefly talking. I like this because it showed more relation building between the Straw Hats and Vivi, that kind of connection building. And eventually Nami seems to act a little weird, and she's like, hey, Vivi, I'm going to go out and go ahead and go to bed because I'm not feeling the greatest. So she walks out on the deck and falls out. Now, any of you who watch One Piece, oh my gosh, holy stutter. Any of you who have watched or read One Piece know that Nami actually has an illness here that they actually have to go to Drum Island for. And then that leads into Tony Chopper. I don't know why I say Tony with like a New Yorker accent, even though it's absolutely awful. But yeah, so that leads into Chopper. So next episode, once I watch it, will likely be on Drum Island. So I really enjoyed this episode. I loved the action. I loved how they included all like the little tidbits from the manga that I was hoping were in there, like the Zoro pose and all that. And it was really just overall a great episode. I loved the Little Garden arc in live action. Like, I didn't know if I would because I didn't know how the Giants would be done. I didn't know all that. But the Giants were done very, very well. Like I said, the Unluckies were did phenomenally. The costume design on all of them were great. Like, all of this, seeing all these Baroque Work agents makes me unable to wait for Bon Clay eventually. Mr. 2. I cannot wait to see him because Bon Clay is the GOAT. The absolute GOAT. So yeah, cannot wait to see, bro. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say about episode 5 of the One Piece live action season 2 show, and all I really have to say about Wax On, Wax Off. And that's, like I said, that's it. So thank you very much for watching episode 42 of Shelf Review, and see ya.